So I want to start off by saying thank you to Brian and Michelle and Chantel and everybody who's putting this together. We're so fortunate to have a physician wellness program in our medical society. I think we've all benefited from it. I also want to thank everyone here for being here and being the kind of doctors who are willing to kind of be here for each other, to be vulnerable, to be available, and to be together. I think that's so important, and it's a blessing to me to be here. So thank you very much. As Brian mentioned, I've been going through some changes lately, and the title of my talk is Slowing Down. And when Brian describes how my career has been shifting from emergency medicine to palliative medicine, the title kind of starts to make sense. I've gone from 10 years in the various St. David's ERs here to now being a fellow at Del Seton in palliative medicine. I've heard some people say that I'm going from being a first responder to being a last responder, which is one way to think about it. So I've been slowing down, and it's been awesome, and I look forward to talking about that a little bit this morning. I have no disclosures. So I'm a real believer in the power of story, and so I'm going to start this morning by telling you all about a story that's kind of a patient who's helped me along this journey. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my thought process as it's been changing and how that has looked. And then lastly, I want to offer some practical thoughts about how we can all look for opportunities to slow down in our lives and in our practices. So, a story. All my slides are this complicated. Okay. So, picture this. My story starts on a cold winter night in a very busy ER during a time I was dealing with some real serious burnout in the middle of the pandemic. And it started when our ER charge nurse came up to me and asked me the following. Hey, Dr. J, can you just come up here and see this guy in triage and get him out of here? It's some old homeless dude. Yeah, I think he's ER shopping. He even has a wristband on from another hospital. Let's get this dude discharged. Oh, I hated this request. We always got asked this, and it was just this pull for throughput, and it felt so dismissive. But, I kind of had to admit that sometimes maybe that's all a patient needs, a quick little visit, kind of a blessing, and move them on their way because the ER's hopping. So, begrudgingly, I agreed. I made sure to click my time in the computer so that we could capture this moment of medical efficiency for posterity and for billing. And I walked over to Triage 1, and there I found Mr. Cassidy. Name changed, but we'll call him Mr. Cassidy. And Mr. Cassidy was a trip. Here was this rough and tumbled old man. He was sitting in a busted-up wheelchair. He looked like a weathered, undernourished, washed-up Santa Claus. He was wearing layers and layers of clothes. He had jeans, sweatpants, layers and layers on top, bunch of hats, old boots, really anything to keep out the cold. But he had this mischievous grin on his face, and I was a little bit nervous. I didn't know where this was going to go. I half wondered if I should be looking over my back to see if one of his buddies was coming for me or something. Well, I introduced myself. Good evening, Mr. Cassidy. I'm Tyler Jorgensen. I'll be your ER doctor tonight. Ah, Jorgensen. Swedish? Now, guess which Scandinavian country has always been a favorite game for my ER patients? Nah, you're close though, Mr. Cassidy. Norwegian. Nailed it. Ah, Dr. Jorgensen. Norwegian. A descendant of Leif Erikson, no doubt. Or was it pronounced Leif Erikson? Well, I say Leif, but how could he say Leif, sailing in a rowboat full of death across the ocean? And do you know what they said when he got here? They said, "Are you Eric the Red?" "No, I am Leif the White." And they were scared because he was wearing horns, because he was horny, because he was ready to rape and kill and pill. Mr. Cassidy, whoa. He was out of control. What are you here for, sir? I hated to cut him off, but we had to kind of get down to business. Well, he started frowning immediately. "Oh, I'm weak tonight, Doc. I can't feel my legs. My back's killing me." Well, that's impossible to sort out in a chair in triage. So I asked my nurses, let's get him back to a room, let's get a gown on him, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. So I walked a couple laps around the ER before going to see Mr. Cassidy again. I took some deep breaths and practiced some mindfulness because I knew this was going to be something else. Well, as soon as I entered the room, boom, he was off to the races again. Tongue twisters just on full display. The manic madness of his words was just bouncing all over the place. I could not sort out why he was here. So I did my best to keep him focused. And again, his smile flattened to a frown. And he really started trying to oversell this leg weakness. I can't move anything, Doc. But he clearly could. So what was his angle? Was he looking for drugs? Did he want some x-rays? Did he need just a break from the cold? Or was he tired of just being dismissed as another bum looking for a turkey sandwich? Maybe all of the above. My examination convinced me that he had no life or limb-threatening emergency that night. So I really tried to dig in a little bit more. His answers finally started slowing down when he could tell we were just trying to help and sort out what was going on. So it turns out he had just been seen in another hospital, thus the wrist bracelet, and he'd been diagnosed with 3 vertebral process fractures. So non-operative, very painful. He'd had a fall. And when they discharged him, they'd sent his prescriptions to a pharmacy electronically, which is great, except as soon as he was discharged, he lost his papers somewhere out in the weather and had no idea where these prescriptions were. So he wasn't gaming us. He just needed help. And we were able to figure it out because we slowed down enough with him to talk through it and figure it out. We got on the EMR, found the pharmacy, found the papers, found where the prescription was, and we were able to help him out. So here's a very disenfranchised patient, a very vulnerable man with a very real medical issue who we could help because both he slowed down and we slowed down. Well, solution in hand, Mr. Cassidy went right back into it. He just started telling stories, and these tongue twisters, just dazzling me all over the place. It was amazing. And just before I discharged him, he dropped a huge whopper on me. Did you know I helped Bob Dylan write his Juarez song? Really? Oh, yeah. Me and Bobby hitched down to Juarez in the spring of '65. Oh, it was a wild time, and we wrote all these songs. You don't believe me? I can sing it for you right now. Oh, yeah, please do. Well, before I had a chance to tell him that this Juarez song is on one of my favorite albums of all time, he arched his back up off the bed and extended his neck and crooned in the loudest, most hideous singing voice you've ever heard. When you're lost in the rain in Juarez and it's Easter time too. Oh, it was beautiful. And I jumped right in with him. By the end of the verse, we were belting it out together. And I don't know who was smiling bigger, me or Mr. Cassidy. His serenade transported us like only music can. We laughed together, we connected. And I swear to you, the walls of the ER melted away. And it was as if we found ourselves sitting around a campfire on a starry night. You know, we were no longer a doctor and a patient. We were new friends. We were humans together. We were sojourners, crossing paths and finding new fellowship under a starry western sky. It was magical. And you know, I could tell in that moment that this was just a small chapter, a part of a much bigger story. His story and my story, a story of a lot of hard nights on the road. A story filled with a crazy cast of characters, a story of surprising encounters down through the years and the startling connections that can happen when we humans slow down and listen to each other. I felt a real honor at being invited into his world that night, into his present and into his past, however real or imagined. You know, I wondered if he really had crossed paths with Bob Dylan all those years ago. It's possible. I wondered how many cold, lonely nights he'd spent outside. Yeah, this magical enchanter of the ER. And how many of those nights were by choice. I often choose to camp when I'm not working in the ER. and maybe these little trips to the ER are the only breaks that he gets from his lifetime of camping out. So I wished we could have talked and sang Bob Dylan songs all night, but the patients were stacking up. So I thanked him for his song and his words, and he drifted off into the night. So I have found more and more over the last couple years that it's moments like this, these campfire moments of connecting with a patient, really keep me going in medicine. But unfortunately, taking the time to connect with people is completely antithetical to all the big drivers in medicine these days. There's a push to go faster, to run lean, to optimize our throughput. You know, in the ER, we're rewarded for these sorts of things. And if you could see somebody in a chair or in the waiting room and kick them out of there, all the better. How can we connect with our patients if we don't slow down to listen? And isn't human connection what we need if we're going to overcome our disillusionment, our post-pandemic dehumanization, our burnout? Something started to change in my ER practice as the subsequent waves of the pandemic came and went. I didn't even notice it at first, and I promise it was not intentional. It just started happening. I persistently found myself lingering in patients' rooms more than I ever had before, patiently listening to their interminable stories, asking them deeper questions, taking longer to talk through their health issues, searching desperately for common ground, some spark of connection to rekindle my passion for patient care. At first, I would chat unhurriedly with a patient every few shifts, but then it became the common theme of all my shifts. I looked for any opportunity I could to slow down and connect with a patient on a human level. And my inefficiency reached an all-time high. What was driving this change? I mean, was I just lonely? Was I making up for lost time? Was I in some way repenting for the multiple collective clinical sins we'd committed inadvertently while we were trying to figure out what the hell to do in the pandemic? Maybe all three. But I wasn't doing it for my patients. I was doing it for me. I knew that I needed more campfire moments, as many as I could have, if I was going to overcome burnout and continue in medicine. And you know what happened as I looked for these moments? I found them. You know, I'd come home from work and tell my wife not about some crazy intubation or some mangled extremity, but I'd tell her about this old jazz drummer I got to care for who once played a set with Count Basie, or an oil painter who taught elementary school students about Van Gogh, or a sweet old mechanic whose prostate cancer has spread and how we got to talk through his next steps and how that might look. It turns out interesting humans who wanted to connect were everywhere. The focus of my practice was changing, and I had to figure out what to do next. I began to think that slowing down might be the move for me. But you know, it's really hard to think coherently when shift after shift and patient after patient keeps coming in the ER. So I felt that I needed some time, and I did something scandalous. I asked for time off. This was crazy. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, for time off. Oh my God. You know, when people find out that as a PGY14, I'm pursuing a fellowship at a PGY4 pay scale, or that with this much gray in my beard, I'm shifting careers, they say, wow, that's really brave. But I got to tell you, that is not brave. That's been easy. If there was a brave moment in this whole process, it was saying, I need time off. It's saying, I'm not superhuman. I need time and I need help to figure out what the next steps are. You know, beyond that, the brave moment was knowing that my colleagues would have to pick up my slack while I was trying to figure out what to do for me. And that's hard for us as doctors to take that step. So I really stewed about it, and I called up a buddy of mine who's a colleague, and, man, should I take this time off? Should I not? And he said, Tyler, when you look back on your life 10 years from now, there is not one shred of you that will say, man, I really regret those 2 months I took off back in 2021. That was a big mistake. It's like, man, that's such a good point. So I took the time off. I asked for it. My company granted it. My amazing ER colleagues covered my shifts. And I stepped out of the whirlwind. I made one simple rule for my time off. No grand gestures. I don't know why, but that phrase stuck into my head. Because, see, in the past, if I'd had 2 months off from work, I would have filled it immediately with adrenaline-fueled adventure. Some kind of paddling trip, rock climbing trip, cross-country road trip. But I knew that this time needed to be different. I needed to slow down. So I stayed at home, I read books, I prayed, I laid on a porch swing quite a bit, I wrote, I went to counseling, I spent time with my wife and kids, and I listened to Van Morrison's Astral Weeks album about 800 times. Highly recommend it. Thank you, thank you. Somebody knows. It was a whole reset, and I desperately needed it, but I was finally out of the whirlwind. And something really amazing happened when I stepped away. I had colleagues come out of the woodwork, not only to help, but to share with me their burnout and their frustrations and their need for time off. It seems that our vulnerability invites others' vulnerability. And I think that's really important. So as I was taking this time, a new direction started to become more clear. Dyke Drummond wrote this book, Stop Physician Burnout, and ironically, the company that I was working for that maybe contributed to my burnout, they did give me this book years ago, and it was dusty on the shelf. And I was like, you know what, they gave me that book all those years. And it's the formats, it's not my favorite book, but there are a lot of really good ideas in there, and there's this thought exercise he recommends. He says, think back to the most meaningful, wonderful patient encounters you've had over the last 6 months. Okay, now how can you restructure your practice so that it's filled with those and it has less of the other stuff? What would that look like for you? I thought back on all these patients with whom I'd started to have campfire moments, patients to whom I'd had to break bad news, families I'd had to console when their loved ones didn't survive a resuscitation, or terminal patients for whom I'd just gotten to be present. And it became very clear to me what my next steps needed to be. I needed to find an inroad into hospice and palliative medicine, and so I applied for a fellowship. And I've been so glad I did, because I have campfire moments all day now. Homemade quilts and old family photos and prayer candles and interesting stories now populate my clinical encounters. And I find it fascinating and life-affirming. It's what I needed. I don't know what the next step will be for me after this fellowship. Still working on that. But this process of slowing down has been so restorative. I love emergency medicine still. It's an incredible field, and I'm so thankful for all my colleagues who are still out there doing it. It's amazing that at any hour you can show up with any crisis and someone will be there to take expert care of you. These guys are my heroes, but not for me anymore. I'm slowing down. So that's just my journey. What would it look like for you? Surely we're not all called to stop and become hospice and palliative medicine doctors. Or are we? How would our medical society look at that moment? But what would it look like for you if you slowed down? Are you at a point where you're burnout, where you're tired, where you've lost your passion for medicine? Maybe you just need a reset? Well, might I suggest slowing down in some way? I have 3 main categories here for slowing down. And the first thing I want to talk about is taking a break. It's the best thing I ever did. If you're at a point where you need to, find a way to get time off. You are awesome and you are invaluable, but the medical world will not melt with you gone for 2 months. It just won't. Life will go on, and when you come back, you'll be better for it. So figure out how to do it. Extended time off is a game changer. Not just, I have a week off, I'm going to fill it, I'm going to get back, I'm going to be just as tired. But how long do you need? Well, it's different for different people. 2 months was great for me. You might need shorter, you might need longer. But if you come back to your clinical site and you still know your computer password, it wasn't long enough. That's for sure. So I want to talk about slowing down with your patients. Surely, as an ER doctor, slowing down with my patients was not super possible. I felt like I was stealing time, whenever I could to have these moments. And I understand that, clinics are busy. Hospitalist life is busy. Everything's busy. It's hard to slow down with patients. But man, these humans we care for are fascinating. And they're wonderful. And there is a real richness when we slow down to see it. We practice better medicine when we understand our patients as the humans they are in the context of their messy lives. We hear amazing stories. We connect. This may sound a little cheesy, but you stop to watch a sunset sometimes, right? But these humans in front of us are far more beautiful and far more interesting than a sunset. But we just hurry past them. So how realistically in an ER, in a clinic, as a hospitalist, in whatever your clinical setting, how can you actually slow down? Well, one is you can change jobs. Now that sounds a little dramatic, but maybe you're at a point where maybe it's time for a big change like that. You have incredibly marketable skills, you are valuable, and maybe there's a company that would value your time more, where it would align more with what you want to be doing. You could restructure your practice. Maybe you run your own clinic, but you could kind of think about clever ways to lengthen patient time slots. You can change specialties like I'm doing, although I don't think that's the answer for a lot of people. It might be. It's kind of cool being a PGY-14 with all these baby doctors running around. It's pretty awesome. But, collectively, over time, we can organize and we can change medicine reimbursement schedules and restructure our organizations, But those are big changes that take time. So what could you do Monday? What could you do tomorrow if you're in the hospital? What if you just tried to slow down to be more present with one patient a day or one patient a half day? That's what I started doing in the ER. It's I can't be slow with everybody. Who's my one today? And it was a game changer, and it could be for you too. We often look for cures for burnout outside of work, but like what Anna was hinting at, and I think some other folks will be hinting at today, maybe some of the cures are at work. Maybe these moments of connection are actually going to bring us out of burnout more than our time away. So there's another trick I learned to try while at work. Slow down to let compliments and thank yous sink in. We never do this. I guarantee you the last time a nurse thanked you for something or a patient said, "You're the best," in your mind or even out loud, you said, no, it's nothing, that's my job. Yeah, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's not nothing. You trained for years to be able to be here in this moment to care for this patient in this way. And it may seem trivial to you, but it is not trivial to that patient. So absorb it. Own that compliment. Next time somebody thanks you, try this. This may sound a little crazy, but I've started doing this and it's awesome. Look them in the eye, thank them for thanking you, and tell them why it means a lot to you. And just let it sink in. Live in the moment for a second and just see what happens. It's a cool practice. So lastly, I recommend slowing down outside of work, slowing down our lives outside of work. Somewhere along the way in America, we decided that busyness is the highest virtue. It's not a virtue. It's horrible. We always, how you been? How you been? Oh, busy, busy. How you been? Busy, busy. What if your answer was, refreshed? How you been? So say no to something. Quit something. Life will go on. We need margin in our lives. Margin is that space where nothing's scheduled, where restoration, magic, spontaneity can happen. So find ways in your life to make that happen. Slow down. Come down off the cortisol. You know you want to. Get small. What we do is hard. You know, there are a lot of pressures on us to go faster, unfortunately. That's not changing right away. Each of us has a unique situation, and there's no universal answer to it. But taking the time to slow down, to step out of the whirlwind for a moment, to come down off the cortisol, to create space and breathing room in our lives, to listen and connect with the humans around us, and to care for ourselves, no matter where you are on your journey, that's going to help. So I always thank Mr. Cassidy for inviting me around his campfire that night. It was really special. And I think about him very often, as crazy as that sounds. And I'm even getting emotional thinking about him. But thank you, Mr. Cassidy. And thank you for being here around this campfire today. So, thank you.